So I'm an x-ray tech at my day job, and I've been wearing this awkward Yeti lanyard for more than 5 years. This lanyard is old, very old, full of memory. Yeah, we've been through an entire pandemic together, and I'm due for a new one. The quick release clasp is broken, and while I've been kicked, punched, smacked, pinched, sworn at, I have never been strangled, and I'm not looking to start. So I'm going to make myself a new lanyard with a clasp. The goal is nerdy, but subtle and pretty enough that it won't invite questions from random strangers. I've decided to use Legolas's chest strap, which is part of his quiver, as my inspiration. And if you think I haven't named it the Lego lanyard, then you don't know me at all. I found the best reference I could find and created a similar pattern in Inkscape. The first step, of course, is cutting out the pattern. Link is in the description. The pattern stretches across 2 pages, so tape it together and cut it out. Just make sure to click the actual size setting so it prints out correctly. This pattern has the option to include a quick release clasp, but if you want to skip that, just trim off the gray sections, tape the pattern together, and you can make it out of all one strap. I'm using about a 5-ounce veg tan cowhide. I used a metal ruler to cut a straight edge, and now I'm using a strap cutter to cut a 2 centimeter wide strap. Leather can also be purchased in strap form if that is your preference. I'm including the quick release clasp, so my pattern's made up of 2 pieces, just trimming my strap down to size. The bottom edges are rounded, so I'm just using a knife to trim those down. Next up, I'm using a sponge to dampen the leather. Some people like to use a spray bottle instead. You don't want your leather to be completely drenched, just dampen the middle and drier on the surface, so I set mine aside to soak in for a little bit. Once the leather was a perfect amount of wetness, I laid my paper pattern on top and traced over it with a pencil to transfer. You can also use a stylus, but I like a pencil because I can keep track of which lines I've traced that way. Once the pattern was transferred, I used a swivel knife to carve out all of the lines. I thought I was just going to use a swivel knife on this pattern, but I ended up using a beveler just by hand to create a tiny little bit of depth. This is just a basic bevel stamp. I set the leather aside to dry completely, and then I used some neat's foot oil to add some hydration back into the leather. Wetting the leather to tool it tends to dry it out. It is skin after all, so hydrating it softens it up and helps with the longevity of your project. Next, I dyed my straps using Thiebing's dye in buckskin color applied with a wool dauber. Because you end up seeing the back of the lanyard, I ended up dyeing both the front and the back of the leather. I used the same dye on the edges and the back as well. Once the dye had completely dried, I applied acrylic resin with a paintbrush to seal it in. I usually use a couple coats of finish, letting it dry in between. I decided I loved the way it looked already, so I skipped the antique for this project and went straight to adding the hardware. I started at the bottom end with the longest strap, punched both holes, and folded the strap over. I slipped my clip over the strap and tucked my other strap in between the 2 layers so I could mark the exact placement of that hole. That hole is indicated on the pattern, but measuring it this way ensures accuracy. Then I punched out that hole and then used a double cap rivet and a rivet setter to secure all 3 layers together. Next, I trimmed down the other end to make sure they were at the exact same length and used the pattern to mark the hole locations for my quick release clasp. I punched out the holes. For some reason, I forgot to mark both of the holes, so I marked those and punched the second holes out as well. Then I realized I'd cut my strap just the teensiest bit wide for my clasp, so I trimmed it down to size so it would fit through. Then I fed the leather strap through the clasp, folded it over, and secured it in place with a double capped rivet. I did the same on both sides. And what do your elf eyes see? My Lego lanyard is all done and ready to be worn. Pattern linkies are down below, and I make lots of nerdy projects, so follow for more.